if we get films like Billy Elliot or 42nd Street, which we just watched, you see the picture of 42nd Street at the bottom. Well, that's the London production of the musical that was created actually in the late or the early 1980s. But it's based upon a film, as you can see above it, that comes from the 1930s. So 42nd Street originated as a film and then made its way to Broadway as a musical. And we've seen that through the Disney productions like Lion King or Beauty and the Beast. Or we've seen the flip of that, like West Side Story began as a musical, and then it was so popular that they made it into a film. The same with The Sound of Music that I keep referring back to. It originated as a musical and then became a film. So, there's a wide variety of inspiration. So I will say that, if you like something like Hamilton, which is based upon a retelling of historical events, then maybe you might like something like Evita by Andrew Lloyd Webber, which tells the historical story of Eva Perón in Argentina. Or you may like Les Miserables, which is the historical fiction of the French Revolution. So, you might look at where your taste of musicals originate and then branch off from there and see where it takes you. Now, the history of Broadway, again, is incredibly diverse. We always, like I tell my students when I teach classes in history, you can't look at history the way you look at the present. It's hard to look at the 1920s America when you're staring at your iPhone because the technology is not the same. So when we talk about early Broadway, getting out of the 19th century, say into the 1920s and 30s, Broadway was very diverse because we didn't have television to entertain us. We didn't have movie theaters to entertain us. So we had a wide variety of theater options to entertain us. So some of us went to Broadway to see ballad operas. Some of us went to Broadway to see musical burlesque or vaudeville variety shows. And some of us went there to see operettas. So there was a wide variety of theater options. It's become consolidated over time because of the vast popularity of the musical form and the musical structure. But I will say that if you want to see a really good historical context for this phase of the Broadway history, go to something like the Ohio lyric opera or the small opera tradition of say, Worcester, Ohio. And you can find a lot of these operettas and these ballad operas and these styles of show still in production. Now, when we think of musicals, we think of, at least for me growing up in the 80s and 90s, I think of, say, Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis and Miss Saigon and Lion King and, Wicked and all of these mega musical productions that have been incredibly popular over the last 30 years. And really, what gives way to that, the impetus for that kind of musical production originates with something like Showboat. Now I have Showboat, it's hard to see, but I actually have the Showboat with William Warfeld, the original lead, the vinyl in the back here. Showboat is significant because for a couple of reasons. One, it's the first opportunity for us to see Oscar Hammerstein, the brilliance of Oscar Hammerstein, and he's going to be paired with Jerome Kern. But really what Showboat shows us is it shows us that we have our first fully integrated book, music, lyrics, stage design, movement, choreography, a seamless integration of all those concepts into a production. Before that, it was very much like a numbers opera where you'd have someone come on stage and sing, then they would leave, and then you'd have a dance group come on stage and they'd perform, and the curtain would go down, and while they were changing the staging, they would have a magic act on stage where there's a lot of broken up. It wasn't really seamless in terms of its production value. Showboat is the first opportunity for us to see, wow, this is really what a musical can be. So it's a really significant musical. So if you get the opportunity to see a production, I would say look at it because it's a really historically significant musical in the evolution of Broadway. It also demonstrates the first opportunity to realize that the characters on stage don't realize they're singing. Before that, a singer would come out and they would demonstrate song, and then they would go back and they'd continue the dialogue. Showboat's the first opportunity for song to represent emotion and not really be like a part of the variety show. The actors on stage, the characters on stage in a production like Showboat and moving forward don't realize they're singing. They just think they're emoting in different ways. And this, of course, gives us the beginning of what we now call Broadway, and of course the onslaught of the Great American Songbook. And if you want to learn about the Great American Songbook in detail, you know, look for us in the future with another one of these lectures where I really delve into the history and evolution of jazz, because that's where we really see Broadway's influence on the development of American popular music. So look for that discussion. But really, when we talk about the advent of Broadway as, you know, today's production, we're talking about the Gershwins, the Irving Berlins, the Cole Porters, the Johnny Mercers, and the real evolution of American pop traditions. Out of that early impetus of Broadway musicals, where we really see like the themes of Broadway being either the Great Depression or World War I, we really see the flourishing of the golden age of Broadway. And I tell my students, you know, if you want to study 1960s music, you really need to focus on the Beatles because they were a major force. Well, in the same regard, if you want to study the golden age of Broadway, you need to study Rodgers and Hammerstein, because they give us the classics like The Sound of Music, Cinderella, Oklahoma, The King and I, South Pacific. Really, those are the lasting legacy of Broadway. And that's really where Broadway really shines as to what its truest potential could be. And it's really where like Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein really show their potential as well. And that, of course, gives way to the next phase of Broadway, and that's the 60s through the 80s, where we really see a flourishing of potential. We no longer see the patriotic themes of, say, World War I and World War II, or the struggles of the Great Depression as our themes, or the landscape of Americana, you know, the West and the cowboy and all that as the themes. We really start to see social themes coming to the forefront, especially with musicals like Hair or Pippin, where we start to see, you know, anti-war themes being explored, you know, because this is the time where we get involved with the Vietnam War, and really the landscape of American socialism and culture and politics is shifting as well. And a lot of that's going to be reflected in the musicals of the time. And really, the major force of this period is Stephen Sondheim with musicals like Sweeney Todd or A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And of course, this is also where a young Andrew Lloyd Webber is going to cut his teeth, collaborating with Tim Rice and giving us great musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar or Evita. And of course, the first of what we now call the mega musicals, and a musical like Cats. Now, out of the early phase and the golden era of Broadway, we really get the true expansion of Broadway with these mega musicals. And it's like looking at early Baroque opera in comparison to, say, Verdi or Puccini, when we really see the true growth and potential of what the musical could be. So really, this is where a lot of people have focused their attention in the last 20 and 30 years, and a lot of us are drawn to musicals because of this. So really, if you really want to see the true potential of what a musical could be, I'd recommend any of these musicals. Cats, I'll just kind of go through them quickly and then I'll open the floor for questions. So Cats is based upon the poetry of T.S. Eliot. It's kind of a review, it's kind of a musical, it's kind of that gray area between the two. Phantom of the Opera is going to be based upon the old story by Gaston Leroux, the French story of the Phantom of the Paris Opera. It's going to be turned into a variety of movies over the years. And then Andrew Lloyd Webber is really going to latch on to that and really demonstrate, you know, his knowledge of the operatic tradition and also in merging that with this pop musical tradition as well. Phantom of the Opera is wonderful in understanding the flow, the idea of staging and the chandelier drop and all of these potentials, the growth of the musical and its potential. Schoenberg and Bublé give us Les Mis, of course, which is based upon the historical fiction of Victor Hugo. Miss Saigon is a retelling of Puccini's Madame Butterfly, where instead of it being set in a 19th century conflict, it's retold through the story of the Vietnam War. So it's the depiction of the U.S. and the Vietnam relationship of the 60s and 70s. A very good story, very powerful story as well. The Lion King, of course, was a Disney movie, which was then staged, and it's incredibly innovative in its staging techniques and its costuming techniques. Wicked, of course, is the precursor to The Wizard of Oz. So if you're familiar with the old movie, The Wizard of Oz, Wicked is kind of the story of what gives us the wicked witch of the wicked witch of the West. That's hard to say fast. So it's the precursor to The Wizard of Oz. And of course, Hamilton is the retelling of the story of Alexander Hamilton through the themes of today. So Hamilton's a little complicated to discuss because one, you have to really understand revolutionary American history, but two, you also have to understand movements like the Black Lives Matter movement and the understanding that it's symbolically representing the story of revolution and the story of American revolutionaries against the tyrants of the British, but it's told more through a story of today's environment and imagining that if the revolution happened today, that it would be based upon the sounds of hip hop. And the real revolutionaries, the real ones fighting for a revolution are from our impoverished communities and from communities like the Latin American population and the Black population. So it's a reimagining of historical stories through the social themes of today. So at least that's the way I've seen it. It's the way I've come to understand it through my viewing of it. So that, again, I kind of ran through that fairly quickly. So, there's a lot to unpack, but if there are any questions you'd like to ask, I'd be happy to field those questions, or if not, we can, move ahead to the next presentation.